Hello, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I'm actually glad that the presentation is working. We'll just give you guys a moment to gather here. I hope you're having an amazing Digital Dragons, my dears. This is a second, I believe, presentation today. I am going to be speaking quite fast because I have, of course, lots of the things prepared for you. However, we'll try to do it in a way that I have last 5 minutes or so for the questions. When we are done, of course, you will have a bit of time with me to ask your questions, and we can also talk after the presentation. So I will be talking to you today about constructing characters for The Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077. My name is Paweł Sasko, and I'm a quest director in PROJEKT. I direct quests, open world, and cinematic departments. I have been here actually 6 years ago on the presentation in regards of, and that time that was quest design for The Witcher 3 and expansions, and I'm really glad to be here again. Now, really quickly what this presentation is going to be about. I have few major sections. At first, I'll just say a few words about me, but this will be short because this is not about it. Then we will talk about purpose of the characters. I will basically try to tell you what we are using and what methods are we using to construct the characters and how actually those characters are taking the roles in our stories. Just after, I will talk to you about the creator's manual, so some guidelines in regards of how we are actually constructing those characters, what are the most important elements to them, and then we are going to move on to the deconstruction method. I wanted to give you something, one of the things that we are doing as a studio, as a designers, when we are working on our stories and on our characters. And at the end, I will actually tell you how the successful pitch for the character looks like. So, starting from basically who I am, I'm working in the industry for many years now. First games that I actually worked on, those have been unfortunately not released. And those of you who will be in the industry long enough, you will probably experience that as well, unfortunately. But then, somewhere around 15, 16 years ago, I joined Reality Pump Studio in Kraków, where I had a pleasure to work on the Two Worlds 2 and Two Worlds 2 Pirates of the Flying Fortress, where towards the end of the production, I became a lead of the team, and then I joined Witcher 2 team. That was almost 12 years ago now. We've been then working on Assassins of Kings Enhanced Edition. So that was the extension, to the Witcher 2 base game. I've been only doing some of the small bug fixing, just learning from my fellow designers. Then I have worked on The Witcher 3 as a senior quest designer, designed part of the main story and side content for that game. And then after that, became a leader of the team and led the team throughout Hearts of Stone, Blood and Wine, and then Cyberpunk 2077. And right now, as a quest director, I have quests, open world, and cinematic departments. It's a team of 60 people, and we are working on Phantom Liberty for you. Now, my dears, because I will be talking about the characters and about the stories, I need to spoil you some things. So I'm really sorry, but if there is anything you didn't see from Cyberpunk or Witcher 3 or both expansions, you just need to leave the room, because otherwise I'm going to spoil you things. And I hope that everyone's gone, that was supposed to be gone. So we will be now going through our schedule, and I will start from the purpose of the characters. And before we do that, I wanted you to watch with me a video depicting an introduction of one of the very important characters in Cyberpunk 2077. Her name is Judy. She has started in our documents only as a brain dance technician. And that really was everything we knew at the very early about this character. And let's see how the introduction of her looks like in Cyberpunk 2077.
Hey, there you are.
This is V. She's here for that BD role. And V, this is Judy. Best brain dance editor I know.
Enough already. Gonna make me barf.
Hey, Judy.
Compiled your BDF.
What do you think? Will it do?
Still pretty raw, but yeah, ought to do.
V needs to get deep inside. That's most important.
So, let's calibrate. Tune it to her. Believe me, I've dealt with worse. Should see the jig street porn we gotta contend with sometimes.
So, we drop V inside? Let her look, let her rummage around, right?
How about it, V? Raw brain dance. Ever taken a dip before?
Think I can handle it. Let's just do this.
Righto. Sit down, settle in, and we'll get you going.
Judy is one of the most beloved characters from Cyberpunk 2077. And at the very beginning, she actually started as a braindance technician, as I mentioned to you just before we watched this video. What's important is the fact that when you're constructing the stories and you really use your characters to tell those stories, because your characters are your most powerful weapon, and I'm going to talk about that slightly later, because the characters are so important to making sure that that story really sticks at the very beginning, actually what you really start is a function. At the very beginning, you only think about what is the function of the character in that story. And honestly, Judy, for a good year, she was just a braindance technician in our documents. That quest has been designed by Sarah Grimmer and written by Magdalena Zich. Those two designers collaborated there to actually create this remarkable and really memorable character for you. And from the very beginning, she was just a function in that story. And when you will look into our documents, if you would look into our documents, you would find out that actually she was just this label. Now, this another example that I have prepared for you here that is playing just behind me. You can see that this is a moment when you as a player, as Geralt, you are getting out of the wardrobe. And you can see Marlena, you know, the white, the spoon collector, she's absolutely getting crazy going around that pot. The thing is that when I started designing that story, that was a quest called La Cage aux Fous in the Witcher 3 Hearts of Stone. When I started designing that story, I knew, Blood and Wine. When I started designing that story, I knew that I want to talk about the feeding disorder. And that really was everything that I had in mind when I started crafting that character. So she, Marlena, she started at first as just a function. She was for me a vehicle to drive you as an audience and teach you and show you the story that I wanted to tell in that given time. And it's really interesting because, like, recently we had a visit of Andrzej Sapkowski in our studio, and you know, some of you might have seen it on social media. And when we talked with Mr. Sapkowski about it, one of the things he told us is that for him, the characters exist for the story and only for the story. There's no character outside of that. What that means? That means that he does not design anything else that is not needed for the story. And this is what I wanted to tell you here about. Characters are very much defined by their context, what is needed there. Sometimes when we are talking to our players, or you know, in case of Andrzej Sapkowski, when he's talking to his readers, you know, they ask questions, you know, what a certain character would do or what would happen in another context. The thing is that character does not really exist outside of that context. And that may really sound trivial, but that actually impacts whole our process in a tremendous way. And I'll talk more about it in a second. Another example here I wanted to show you is from Battle of Kermoren. That's the quest that I've been working on for The Witcher 3, and I knew that this is a moment when I need to drive Ciri to the very edge of her sanity. I wanted to make sure that she really goes through that tremendous change in her story arc. That's why there's this event of actually Vesemir dying. And I'm sorry for the spoilers, I warned you. So that moment when he actually dies, that is something that I came up with and asked our story director, Marcin Blacha, if he's fine with going with that, because what we needed to do, we needed to make sure that series storyline will be propelled forward, that from actual prey, she will be turned into hunter. But to make that change in that character, you really have to provide her with a very big impact, with something that will really touch her. And this is the second thing I wanted to tell you and wanted you to memorize, is that you can make the plot for the characters, but you can also make the character for the plot. Very often when we talk internally in our studio, people ask, what is first, should we start from the character or should we maybe start from a plot? And the thing is, it's more like a, chicken or egg dilemma and that kind of conversation. What's important here is that both of those things coexist well. And this exact example, the moment with Ciri in Battle of Cormoran, that was the moment when I actually decided to bend the plot for the character, because I felt that it's so important to show this transition well. That's why that's why this moment of Vesemir dying is there, and we decided to change a plot slightly to make sure that this character feels the best. Another example here is actually with Jackie. This is coming from the very early stages of Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk as a game, as a story, has a very unusual construction. After the actual prologue and first opening of the game, there's something that we call a half-year montage, and after that, there is this moment of, big heist, and only then the actual game starts. It's a whole complete different conversation in regards of, how Cyberpunk is structured, because I think it's a very interesting and I would say modern and unusual construction. But what we have done here, we have based all of the emotions and everything actually that happens in that story on Jackie as a character. That's why throughout that half-year montage, the moment when you are with him, you are actually, as a player, seeing him actually in many different situations. And here is the example of him simply dancing with you on a dance floor. And I wanted to tie this up with the first point that I made. The characters are really your most powerful weapon in your story. The characters are the things that are memorable for the players. The player rarely remembers, oh yeah, do you remember this amazing twist that happened there and there? They sometimes do, but in most cases, they remember the characters. There is a reason why, if you search for Cyberpunk or Witcher 3, a lot of the content is from Rule 34 in the internet. That's the reason, because our characters really stick with our players. They really remember them, because they are your most powerful weapon to tell your story. Now, my dears, this concludes the first part of the purpose of the characters. So now when we know actually what the characters are for in our stories, we are going to go now through the creator's manual. And here I'm going to talk to you about 3 separate sections. And we are going to be talking about context, conflict, and archetype. And let's start first from the context. When I was working on the Bloody Baron storyline for The Witcher 3, one of the important things that I knew from the very beginning is the fact that Bloody Baron, he is supposed to be an embodiment of Velen. And that's probably one of the best advice I can give you as a, creators or maybe future creators. When you're constructing your story, in your story you have specific themes and specific elements of that story that you want to make sure that player understands. What you want to do, you want to make sure that you have characters that are manifestation or representation of those themes. It's not a complete coincidence, that Bloody Baron, he is a drunkard. He has a PTSD. He is a man that has been beating his wife. His whole family has been tormented by him. The reason is because I really wanted to capture Velen, this world-ravished land, in this one person. That's why you meet him, that's why he is there. And this is the point number one I wanted to make in regards of the context. The context of the character very much defines him or her. It's important for you to know and understand what kind of game you're making and what kind of story you're making, and recognizing that context will allow you to build proper characters to tell your story. And now, let's look actually with lots other examples of different contexts, how you can actually discover or maybe discuss your characters in. And here's just many different examples, many different facets. One of them is genre. One of the things that actually a lot of the future storytellers, and I would say young storytellers, completely miss, the fact that their story should have some kind of identity. You should be telling the story that you know what that story is. So is your story a comedy? Or is it a tragedy? When I was writing a quest about wedding for Hearts of Stone, at that time I knew that what I'm building is a comedy. I wanted to build a comedy, therefore all the characters, all the events, things that I'm using there, they all fit to that kind of genre. But there is much more. There's thriller, and then there's spy thriller, wink wink, Phantom Liberty. There are though other elements here when it comes to context where characters come from. And one of the most powerful ones is actually the theme. A lot of games and a lot of storytellers actually completely oversee that element. Recognizing what your theme is will answer your questions as a storyteller, what your story should be about. An example here is authority, fatherhood. When it comes to fatherhood, that is the theme of Bloody Baron's storyline. I am there drawing a parallel between two different fathers. Geralt, father for Ciri, and Bloody Baron, a father for his daughter. And between those two fathers, I'm drawing a parallel constantly and asking you as a player a question, what you think about those two different fathers, how they should act. And through your choices in Witcher 3, you're crafting your own understanding and what that fatherhood is. I'm not going to be going over all of the contexts here that you have provided because that is a completely separate talk and it's really long. I will just mention a few more things from social groups. Interesting thing is, for instance, here an example that you have on the screen, Dum Dum. Dum Dum is a tertiary character, a character that normally is just at the background. And when I was working on that quest, the pickup for The Witcher 3, I knew that this guy is going to be on the screen for just a brief moment. I bring him later up in one of the side quests and I show through him the consequences of your choices, but I knew that this guy is going to be on the screen for a very brief moment. Because of that, from very early, we had conversations about how to make that guy characteristic and how to make him manifest the value pyramid, the value structure of his social group. He is a member of a Maelstrom gang. They are absolutely like fucked up weirdos, who modify their bodies. One of the important decisions that our character art team made was to replace their faces and remove like the eyes, and the whole like faceplate part is replaced to something to whatever of their liking. And that was important for me when I was constructing Dum Dum, to make sure that even though he will be a pretty simple as a character, he will be unique enough for you as a player to grasp him in a broad sense. There are other elements here that I already touched. For instance, gameplay. Judy is actually the character that came up from the mechanics, because we knew from the very beginning that we are going to be telling you as a player about braindance as a concept existing in our world, in the world of Cyberpunk 2077. Because of that, we had to make sure that we'll have a character that will manifest that will present that point. That's why she started as a braindance technician. Other elements here like tropes like insanity, loyalty, survival. Takimura, he's a great example of loyalty trope. And at the end you have lore like cyber psychosis or errant knights. Errant knights, you probably remember them from Blood and Wine. Now when we talked about context, we are going to be now talking about conflict. Now, for the storytellers, this sounds absolutely obvious. What you should have a conflict in your story, but there's so much more to that. The example that I'm just right now showing you, this is Panam talking to Saul. This is in a sort of maybe like in the middle or in the peak of her story arc. That moment when she absolutely loses her shit and she's just angry at him, she is really expressive, she's screaming at this guy, she's just angry. That is the moment when a lot of players actually said that that is the moment when they fall in love with her as a character. The conflict is really the salt of your story. If you are feeling that your story doesn't go anywhere, or for instance, when you're actually building the dialogues and writing the dialogues and scenes for your game, and when you're asking yourself, okay, why I just don't have anything to talk about in that dialogue, that is the reason. The reason is because you don't have enough conflict in your stories. Now, second thing I wanted to mention is an introduction on one of the most important characters in Cyberpunk 2077, Johnny Silverhand. Let's watch this together.
Gotta get out of here, understand? And I'll kill anyone who gets in my way, you included. Need a smoke. Where'd you stash yours?
Where did you even come from? How are we even talking?
How the fuck should I know? The fuck kind of droid toy are you supposed to be?
Fucking ghost off!
Who you work for, start talking!
Fuck!
Fuck. Fucking chip. Rip the thing out myself.
No, wait!
I'm not going to spoil you anything more in regards of the Johnny's introduction if you didn't play the game. Why I'm showing you that? Because you could see that in that scene, that conflict is absolutely everywhere inside that storyline. Johnny Silverhand is a very conflicted character. The conflict is really driving everything he does. He died in 2023 trying to fight against the forces that he hated. He woke up in 2077 absolutely not knowing what happened. He's conflicted with himself, he's conflicted with the world, with the forces that are driving the world, and every scene with Johnny is about this. And what's really important is the fact that when you are building a conflict, the conflict does not have to be literal. If you are wondering, how I should build my conflict, should I introduce more characters? You don't have to. Sometimes conflict can be a character versus the world. It can be a character versus himself or herself. It can be just internal. And a lot of the times, people think that it's so basic, right? That the conflict should be actually with other characters, but it's not. The most important and intriguing and best conflicts that we have in our games are the conflicts with the characters internally. Bloody Baron that I gave you example just a moment ago, he is exactly that kind of character. And one of the last and most important elements here of building a characters, you need to be sure that your characters suffer. You need to be sure that your characters suffer. Here, let's look at this example. This is a moment when you are meeting Judy. She is broken. At the moment when something really bad happened to Evelyn, you are called out by Judy, you come there, you don't know what's going on. She's sitting there crying, with her makeup running down her face, and you can see what she's going through. It's really important for us as storytellers to understand that good conflict is in a situation when the character has needs and purpose that they're going towards, and there are obstacles on the way preventing that. And that obstacles can be forces of the world. It can be other characters. What's important is the fact that the vector of their actions is contradictory of what character wants. So Judy needs to want something that she cannot get. This is true for so many characters in our games. So if I want you to memorize one thing from that whole talk, please remember about this. You need to make your characters suffer. All the power in the world, it's always earned. Each one of us is going through the period of learning, of maturing, of getting more knowledge, getting more more power, more position, more money. Each of us has to work for that, and that is very true for storytelling. Our characters need to do that too, and sometimes we do completely forget about this when building the storylines. Please remember, all the power in the world and position is always earned. Now, my dears, this concludes the part about conflict. Now I'm going to be talking about the archetypes. Let's look at the example I'm showing you here right now. This is Takimura, who's facing Dex, and he's delivering the justice. Takimura is one of the more important characters in Cyberpunk 2077. He is one of the characters who are the manifestation of the corporate life path, and we'll talk about it more moving forward. This character has started as an archetype. Philip Weber, our senior quest designer at the time, when Philip was building that quest, Philip thought about the character of Ronin. Ronin is a samurai who has lost his master. And this is really the archetype that Takimura started as. At the very first version of the documents that we have written about this quest and the whole storyline, Takimura was just mentioned as a Ronin in that document. And in here, there is a moment when we introduce him as a character, and of course, this scene is actually doing multiple different things. It's introducing him as an interesting, iconic character, but in the same time, he's also used to finish storyline of other character, who's Dexter Deshawn in this case. As you know, if you played Cyberpunk 2077, you know that this guy wasn't too nice. And because of that, Takimura delivers here the justice. Now, what's important is the fact that you need to, when you're starting from the archetype, you need to recognize what's the difference between falling into cliche category from archetype. Archetypes are great to be used. You will recognize that when building a certain genres or certain themes of your story, you will need to use the archetypes of the characters, but then you need to beware not to move towards cliches. And how to do that? Looking at the Takimura, he is an excellent example of that. The core and most important center of that story and the spine of it is around the fact that he is a samurai that lost his master. But that's it. All the other elements, the fact that Takimura is a foodie, and he believes, because he's a traditionalist, he believes that food should be prepared in a traditional way with respect to it. That's why he actually in the game, multiple times Googles or tries to search, for good food places. That's why actually talking about food takes some place in the story about Takimura. What you do when you have the archetypes, you layer next elements of that character over what you have already prepared to make sure that you don't have that character too one-dimensional, that you do not fall from archetype to cliche trap. Cliches are in situations when you're using and showing that exact characters of the archetype that are a center of the archetype in the most typical and cliche ways. An example of that would be a cowboy who has a standoff at the noon, in the middle of a small town with a, tumbleweed rolling. That is the example of just using it as a cliche. But you can actually have an example of that done in excellent way in your stories. Let's move on because I don't have this much time and I'm talking too much. Now, one of the cool ways to make your characters stand out are props. we are using that as a storytellers a lot. Characters have certain attributes to them that make them recognizable and unique. If you look at The Witcher 3, but Cyberpunk more so, you will see that your characters in the game, they have vehicles, they have weapons that they have been using throughout the game that are iconic and recognizable for them. You know, Rogue, she's using the Unity handgun, and she has this Predator Quadra that is standing in the front of Afterlife. All of those elements have been consciously done by us, that those NPCs own those certain props. And props are cool, but emotions are cooler. This is what our story director, Tomek Marchewka, sometimes say. How to make sure that the emotions are there with your prop. Let's look at, are there with your prop. Let's look here at the example that I have prepared for you. The moment when Misty hands you over the pendant. The thing is that at the very beginning of work on Cyberpunk 2077 storyline, we didn't know that we are going to have that pendant there in the story. And we recognize that we need something that will be transferring that emotional load that we want the player to remember, to feel. That is the reason why this pendant comes back, you know, at the end of the story. You are gifted it here as a sign. That's the bullet that your head was hit with, and then at the end of the game, it comes back, and it's always treated as a sign. And this is what we are doing. This exact scene here with the Misty giving you that pendant, she is actually now charging that pendant with emotions. And this is how you do it. Now, you need to beware of one thing. You need to be beware of mimics, or rather gimmicks. Mimics are not nice too, but I meant gimmicks. So when we were working on the character of Fingers for Cyberpunk 2077, we knew from the very beginning that he's gonna be like a really fucked up, weirdo kind of, you know, ripper dog. Really awfully looking person and acting in a really sleazy way. We really wanted to do it from the very beginning, and we knew about that. Why we are doing this? Because he is a tertiary character. He's a character in the background. If you really want to make those characters stand out, their character traits and elements that characterize them, those need to be much more visible. But there, you're running into a possibility of making all of those elements look like gimmicks. That your characters just, you know, for instance, someone doesn't have teeth, you know, front teeth, and they're just speaking in a weird way, and that's it, and there's nothing else about it. You are risking the situation where the character can become shallow. And here, you know, we have been consciously working with those, I would say, props and decorations we have used with Fingers to actually make sure that he is not shallow as a character, that there is something more to him, you know, and even though he's still an awful, completely awful kind of character in the game, we wanted to make sure that all of those props and things around him, the way he looks, the way he acts, that there is more depth to this guy. So one last thing about in regards of archetypes, if you are using this, like I would say, broad strokes of paint to create your characters, if you are using that, you need to remember that if you characterize someone so briefly, you're running into the risk of making them feel like gimmicks. Now, my dears, this concludes the archetypes part, and we are moving on to deconstruction. Now, the deconstruction is one of the most powerful methods that I can teach you today, and hopefully this will happen. I'll manage to do that. Deconstruction is one of the methods that we are using when working on our stories. Let's look here at the example I have prepared for you. This is a moment when you're meeting Hanako in Embers. Now, she is there, and that whole storyline is there because when we were working on Cyberpunk, in some stage, we have recognized that we have missed a very important element of the typical, I would say, Cyberpunk story, and that was everything related to corporations. We felt that storyline is missing, and at that time, I believe that was beginning of 2019, we realized, okay, we need to actually sit back and look at our story and think, because we have missed something important. And how we have actually reached that? We have reached that through deconstruction. Deconstruction is a method of actually understanding your own storyline. It's a method of dividing it into pieces, dividing it into theme and genre, asking yourself questions of why the characters do what they do. Asking the questions if your dramatic question is stated strongly enough. Throughout the deconstruction and trying to analyze your own story and your own creation, you are able to get to that answers. And that was the thing that happened to us as well when we were working on Cyberpunk 2077. This is one of the reasons why we have decided to move on and add that whole storyline there. So you as a player, you can actually experience the corpus storyline. Takimura, as one of the characters, he is representing this world. He's representing this point of view. Same goes for Hanako. This is the reason why you have that whole storyline in Cyberpunk. Now, another thing is that when you are actually using the deconstruction, you can arrive at the solutions that were before hindering your narrative. And here is the example of Vladimir. Vladimir is this ghost that you're awaking during Hearts of Stone in The Witcher 3. That's one of the quests that I worked on. And you know what I wanted to do? After we finished Witcher 3, I was really tired of the questions. Why Geralt does it? Geralt wouldn't ever do that. Geralt wouldn't ever act like that. As a designer, I was so tired of constantly hearing that questions from everyone. So I thought, okay, I need a method in which I am going to be able to do weird shit with Geralt, and no one, literally no one, will be able to tell me this is not what Geralt would do. And throughout that, and throughout the deconstruction of that need and that goal, I arrived at this idea, what if I awake a ghost and Geralt, through the somewhat failed ritual, makes him possess Geralt rather than someone else? What if I do it like this, that it wasn't planned, but then he sort of becomes Geralt and he starts playing completely different character? And you know, those of you who played the game know what I'm talking about. Vladimir as Geralt is completely different than Geralt as Geralt. And arriving to that solution, to arrive to that solution, I had to use the deconstruction. I looked into like my own need as a designer, what I want to achieve, and I asked myself a question, what are the components of that storyline? What is making me really be excited about this? And throughout asking those questions, I actually finally arrived at the solution, and the solution is the thing that you see in the game. Now, one of the last things I wanted to say is that when you're using the deconstruction and when you're looking at your story, you will be able to identify missing elements of that story. And here, an example that I'm showing you, this is a clip from a Sinnerman quest, one of the more recognizable quests from Cyberpunk 2077, a moment when Joshua Stevenson, a convict, a guy who is going to die, he goes into deep change in himself when he's in a prison, and he decides to die on a cross and use a brain dance to record his transition, to record this moment of him actually dying on a cross. And the idea was to basically recreate a Passion of Christ inside Cyberpunk 2077. And this is what we have done. One of the designers that was working on this, Przemek Tarczyński, Przemek had this idea that you are doing all of those things as a player, but the quest was ending at the moment when we are delivering Joshua Stevenson to the Braindance studio. That was it. The whole crucifixion didn't happen in the original version of that story. And when I was working with Przemek, I asked him, but the most iconic and coolest part of that quest is the crucifixion. We should do it. And we should use our interactive scene system to actually put the players in the shoes of that character and really make that, really make the player go through this together with him. And I arrived in that realization as a director, as a lead at the time, as a director later, I arrived in that when using deconstruction, I looked at the story that Przemek has constructed and asked myself questions, what is missing? Why I'm feeling that something's missing? And I started dividing and started thinking, okay, what is actually the element that would really make it stay in players' memory and make it really stick? So, summing it up, my dears, one of the best ways to train deconstruction is to torment your own partners. And what I do, I really utilize it in life. When I watch a movie and I play a game and I read a comic book, I always talk to my friends or my partner and we analyze together. And that is such a wonderful way to learn the construction. If you're wondering how you can learn this, start from phrasing what you like and what you don't like in a given story. And when you are able to tell it already, it takes a lot of effort to learn that, to be able to say why I don't like it, then next step, and that's the step that I always advise my designers to do, is to ask yourself how to fix it. You went to the movie and you liked it, but there's one thing that you hated. Ask yourself a question, okay, why you didn't like it, what was wrong, and when you know, fix it. Figure out the smallest possible fix you can apply to that story. Maybe it's a seed, maybe it's an action sequence, maybe the whole sequence is missing, or maybe there's too much of something. That happens too. You know, when stories are overblown, you know, when they're bloated, you won't feel that a story doesn't stick, you know, doesn't slap, you know, the bang is missing. You know, you will get there, and if you know that what is wrong, then you will be able to arrive at how to fix it. And this is the best way for you to learn the construction. To parse it, to divide that story into pieces, recognize it, understand it, and be able to fix it, and even make it better than the original creator. And that, my dears, concludes the construction part. Now we are going to be talking about the character pitch and how the successful pitches look like. I need to speed up slightly because, as always, I'm talking slightly too much. So, most of the designers who are starting and storytellers, they believe that when you're constructing a character, you need to take a RPG sheet, or you need to start making a dating profile, or start making a Facebook page of your own character. That is, I think it's completely wrong way to go about it. If you Google it today, what is the advice of building characters? This is literally what you are going to find. And I think it's a completely wrong way to go about it. The best characters are always the characters when you are able to grasp the core of that character in 2 to 3 sentences. That's it, nothing else. Here is the example of Royce. Royce, he is the leader of the Maelstromers. You know, another completely fucked up character, a psycho from Maelstromers. We knew what this guy is supposed to be, and that was literally 1 or 2 sentences that we had together with Tomek Marchewka, who wrote dialogues for this quest. When I worked with Tomek, we knew basically in like 2 sentences what that guy is going to be and who that guy is going to be. That's it. That's everything. And when you are saying to yourself, my character, I cannot explain the complexity of my character in 2 to 3 sentences, I am quite convinced that your character is constructed in a wrong way. Everything that you can phrase, and I will quote Aristoteles here, everything you can say briefly. And, you know, I'm not a great example of that, but if you are working on a character pitches, you can grasp them in 2 to 3 sentences. And this is literally how our best characters start. And when you're discussing things between designers and so on, you know, fellow environment artists or programmers, they won't have time to read like loads of documents. You need to be able in 2 sentences, tell them who that character is right away, and they need to be able to see it. Another example here is actually Mr. Mirror. So you could actually see that Mr. Mirror was here accompanying us throughout this speech. You could see that Mr. Mirror is considered by our players as one of the best characters we have ever developed. This guy literally started as 2 to 3 sentences. That was it. He was literally a devil that can tinker with people's faith. That's it. Literally everything about him. And then on top of that, you layer another elements that make him much more rich. And that's why I told you that 2 to 3 sentences. If you cannot make your imagination race in those 2 to 3 sentences, you won't be able to do it in 200 to 300 pages. That's literally the same thing. And if someone tells me that, yeah, this character is so complex and there's so much about him or her, I normally don't believe them. Like, it's really possible to do all of that work and phrase it very briefly. And one last thing I wanted to mention here. You are building those character pitches for a specific purpose. And the purpose is to arrive at the base that you, as a storyteller, you will be able to use to prepare a character profile document. Those documents are normally written for primary and secondary characters, not so much for tertiary. I really encourage you to write those documents based on that exciting and short pitch and expand on what you have done, but it needs to all come back to these 2 to 3 sentences. And one of the cool, I would say, tricks that I can advise you to do is to have an example of character's voice in that document. And what I mean by that, writing, how they talk, the idiolect, their specific language that they are using to communicate. Having those examples in character documents is really, really helpful. We as a studio, we didn't always do that. We tried to do it. It's not always so simple and so easy to do, but I really encourage you to do that because it allows all of the writers and all of the narrative team to go and be on the same page. And that, my dears, concludes the character pitch part. Thank you so much for attending this talk.